Chapter 29. The Major Decision of Tour Life. This chapter is addressed to young men and women who haven't yet found the work they want to do. If you are in that category, reading this chapter may have a profound effect upon the remainder of your life. If you are under 18, you will probably soon be called upon to make the two most important decisions of your life, decisions that will profoundly alter all the days of your years. Decisions that may have far-reaching effects upon your happiness, your income, your health. Decisions that may make or break you. What are these two tremendous decisions? First, how are you going to make a living? Are you going to be a farmer, a mail carrier, a chemist, a forest ranger, a stenographer, a horse dealer, a college professor, or are you going to run a hamburger stand? Second, whom are you going to select to be the father or mother of your children? Both of those great decisions are frequently gambles. Every boy, says Harry Emerson Fossil in his book, The Power to See It Through, every boy is a gambler when he chooses a vocation. He must stake his life on it. How can you reduce the gamble in selecting a vocation? Read on. We will tell you as best we can. First, try, if possible, to find work that you enjoy. I once asked David M. Goodrich, chairman of the board, B.F. Goodrich Company-wide Manufacturers, what he considered the first requisite of success in business, and he replied, having a good time at your work. If you enjoy what you are doing, he said, you may work long hours, but it won't seem like work at all. It will seem like play. Edison was a good example of that. Edison, the unschooled newsboy who grew up to transform the industrial life of America. Edison, the man who often ate and slept in his laboratory and toiled there for 18 hours a day. But it wasn't toil to him. I never did a day's work in my life, he exclaimed. It was all fun. No wonder he succeeded. I once heard Charles Schwab say much the same thing. He said, a man can succeed at almost anything for which he has unlimited enthusiasm. But how can you have enthusiasm for a job when you haven't the foggiest idea of what you want to do? The greatest tragedy I know of, said Mrs. Edna Kerr, who once hired thousands of employees for the DuPont Company and is now Assistant Director of Industrial Relations for the American Home Products Company. The greatest tragedy I know of, she told me, is that so many young people never discover what they really want to do. I think no one else is so much to be pitied as the person who gets nothing at all out of his work but his pay. Mrs. Kerr reports that even college graduates come to her and say, I have a BA degree from Dartmouth or an MA from Cornell. Have you some kind of work I can do for your firm? They don't know themselves what they are able to do, or even what they would like to do. Is it any wonder that so many men and women who start out in life with competent minds and rosy dreams end up at 40 in utter frustration and even with a nervous breakdown? In fact, finding the right occupation is important even for your health. When Dr. Raymond Pearl of Johns Hopkins made a study, together with some insurance companies, to discover the factors that make for a long life, he placed the right occupation high on the list. He might have said with Thomas Carlyle, blessed is the man who has found his work. Let him ask no other blessedness. I recently spent an evening with Paul W. Boston, employment supervisor for the So-Coney Vacuum Oil Company. During the last 20 years, he has interviewed more than 75,000 people looking for jobs, and he has written a book entitled 6 Ways to Get a Job. I asked him, what is the greatest mistake young people make today in looking for work? They don't know what they want to do, he said. It is perfectly appalling to realize that a man will give more thought to buying a suit of clothes that will wear out in a few years than he will give to choosing the career on which his whole future depends on, which his whole future happiness and peace of mind are based. And so what? What can you do about it? You can take advantage of a new profession called vocational guidance. It may help you or harm you depending on the ability and character of the counselor you consult. This new profession isn't even within gunshot of perfection yet. It hasn't even reached the Model T stage, but it has a great future. How can you make use of this science? By finding out where, in your community, you can get vocational tests and vocational advice. Such advice can only take the form of suggestions. You have to make the decisions. Remember that these counselors are far from infallible. They don't always agree with one another. They sometimes make ridiculous mistakes. For example, a vocational guidance counselor advised one of my students to become a writer solely because she had a large vocabulary. How absurd. It isn't as simple as that. Good writing is the kind that transfers your thoughts and emotions to the reader. And to do that, you don't need a large vocabulary, but you do need ideas, experience, convictions, examples, and excitement. The vocational counselor who advised this girl with a large vocabulary to become an author succeeded in doing only one thing. He turned an erstwhile happy stenographer into a frustrated, would-be novelist. The point I am trying to make is that vocational guidance experts, even as you and I, are not infallible. Perhaps you had better consult several of them and then interpret their findings in the sunlight of common sense. You may think it's strange that I am including a chapter like this in a book devoted to worry. But it isn't strange at all when you understand how many of our worries, regrets, and frustrations are spawned by work we despise. Ask your father about it, or your neighbor, or your boss. No less an intellectual giant than John Stuart Mill declared that industrial misfits are among the heaviest losses of society. Yes, and among the unhappiest people on this earth are those same industrial misfits who hate their daily work. Do you know the kind of man who cracked up in the army? The man who was misplaced. I'm not talking about battle casualties, but about the men who cracked up in ordinary service. Dr. William Meninges, one of our greatest living psychiatrists, was in charge of the Army's neuropsychiatric division during the war, and he says, "We learn much in the Army as to the importance of selection and of placement, of putting the right man in the right job." A conviction of the importance of the job at hand was extremely important. Where a man had no interest, where he felt he was misplaced, where he thought he was not appreciated, where he believed his talents were being misused, invariably we found a potential, if not an actual psychiatric casualty. Yes, and for the same reasons, a man may crack up in industry. If he despises his business, he can crack it up, too. Take, for example, the case of Phil Johnson. Phil Johnson's father owned a laundry, so he gave his son a job, hoping the boy would work into the business. But Phil hated the laundry, so he dawdled, loafed, did what he had to do, and not a lick more. Some days he was absent. His father was so hurt to think he had a shiftless, ambitionless son that he was actually ashamed before his employees. One day Phil Johnson told his father he wanted to be a mechanic, work in a machine shop. What? Go back to overalls? The old man was shocked. But Phil had his way. He worked in greasy dungarees. He did much harder work than was required at the laundry. Furthermore, he worked longer hours, and he whistled at his job. Besides, he took up engineering, learned about engines, puttered with machines, and when Philip Johnson died, in 1944, he was president of the Boeing Aircraft Company and was making the flying fortresses that helped to win the war. If he had stuck with the laundry, what would have happened to him and the laundry, especially after his father's death? My guess is he would have ruined the business, cracked it up, and run it into the ground. Even at the risk of starting family rows, I would like to say to young people, don't feel compelled to enter a business or trade just because your family wants you to do it. Don't enter a career unless you want to do it. However, consider carefully the advice of your parents. They have probably lived twice as long as you have. They have gained the kind of wisdom that comes only from much experience and the passing of many years. But, in the last analysis, you are the one who has to make the final decision. You are the one who is going to be either happy or miserable at your work. Now, having said this, let me give you the following suggestions, some of them warnings about choosing your work. 1. Read and study the following 5 suggestions about selecting a vocational guidance counselor. These suggestions are right from the horse's mouth. They were made by one of America's leading vocational guidance experts, Professor Harry Dexter Kitson of Columbia University. A. Don't go to anyone who tells you that he has a magic system that will indicate your vocational aptitude. In this group are phrenologists, astrologers, character analysts, handwriting experts. Their systems do not work. B. Don't go to anyone who tells you that he can give you a test that will indicate what occupation you should choose. Such a person violates the principle that a vocational counselor must take into account the physical, social, and economic conditions surrounding the counseled. and he should render his service in the light of the occupational opportunities open to the counseled. C. Seek a vocational counselor who has an adequate library of information about occupations and uses it in the counseling process. D. A thorough vocational guidance service generally requires more than one interview. E. Never accept vocational guidance by mail. 2. Keep out of business and professions that are already jam-packed and overflowing. There are many thousands of different ways of making a living. But do young people know this? Not unless they hire a swami to gaze into a crystal ball. The result? In one school, 2/3 of the boys confined their choices to 5 occupations. 5 out of 20,000 and 4/5 of the girls did the same. Small wonder that a few business and professions are overcrowded. Small wonder that insecurity, worry, and anxiety neuroses are rampant at times among the white-collar fraternity. I beware of trying to elbow your way into such overcrowded fields as law, journalism, radio, motion pictures, and the glamour occupations. 3. Stay out of activities where the chances are only 1 out of 10 of your being able to make a living. As an example, take selling life insurance. Each year, countless thousands of men, frequently unemployed men, start out trying to sell life insurance without bothering to find out in advance what is likely to happen to them. Here is approximately what does happen, according to Franklin L. Better, Real Estate Trust Building, Philadelphia. For 20 years, Mr. Better was one of the outstandingly successful insurance salesmen in America. He declares that 90% of the men who start selling life insurance get so heartsick and discouraged that they give it up within a year. Out of the 10 who remain, 1 man will sell 90% of the insurance sold by the group of 10, and the other 9 will sell only 10%. To put it another way, if you start selling life insurance, the chances are 9 to 1 that you will fail and quit within 12 months, and the chances are only 1 in 100 that you will make $10,000 a year out of it. Even if you remain at it, the chances are only 1 out of 10 that you will be able to do anything more than barely scratch out a living. 4. Spend weeks, even months, if necessary, finding out all you can about an occupation before deciding to devote your life to it. How? By interviewing men and women who have already spent 10, 20, or 40 years in that occupation. These interviews may have a profound effect on your future. I know that from my own experience. When I was in my early 20s, I sought the vocational advice of 2 older men. As I look back now, I can see that those 2 interviews were turning points in my career. In fact, it would be difficult for me even to imagine what my life would have been like had I not had those 2 interviews. How can you get these vocational guidance interviews? To illustrate, let's suppose that you are thinking about studying to be an architect. Before you make your decision, you ought to spend weeks interviewing the architects in your city and in adjoining cities. You can get their names and addresses out of a classified telephone directory. You can call at their offices either with or without an appointment. If you wish to make an appointment, write them something like this: "Won't you please do me a little favor? I want your advice. I am 18 years old, and I am thinking about studying to be an architect. Before I make up my mind, I would like to ask your advice. If you are too busy to see me at your office, I would be most grateful if you would grant me the privilege of seeing you for half an hour at your home. Here is a list of questions I would like to ask you. A. If you had your life to live over, would you become an architect again? B. After you have sized me up, I want to ask you whether you think I have what it takes to succeed as an architect. C. Is the profession of architecture overcrowded? D. If I studied architecture for 4 years, would it be difficult for me to get a job? What kind of job would I have to take at first? E. If I had average ability, how much could I hope to earn during the first 5 years? F. What are the advantages and disadvantages of being an architect? G. If I were your son, would you advise me to become an architect? If you are timid and hesitate to face a big shot alone, here are 2 suggestions that will help. First, get a lad of your own age to go with you. The 2 of you will bolster up one another's confidence. If you haven't someone of your own age to go with you, ask your father to go with you. Second, remember that by asking his advice, you are paying this man a compliment. He may feel flattered by your request. Remember that adults like to give advice to young men and women. The architect will probably enjoy the interview. If you hesitate to write letters asking for an appointment, then go to a man's office without an appointment and tell him you would be most grateful if he would give you a bit of advice. Suppose you call on 5 architects, and they are all too busy to see you, which isn't likely. Call on 5 more. Some of them will see you and give you priceless advice that may save you years of lost time and heartbreak. Remember that you are making one of the 2 most vital and far-reaching decisions of your life. So, take time to get the facts before you act. If you don't, you may spend half a lifetime regretting it. If you can afford to do so, offer to pay a man for a half hour of his time and advice. 5. Get over the mistaken belief that you are fitted for only a single occupation. Every normal person can succeed at a number of occupations, and every normal person would probably fail in many occupations. Take myself, for example. If I had studied and prepared myself for the following occupations, I believe I would have had a good chance of achieving some small measure of success and also of enjoying my work. I refer to such occupations as farming, fruit growing, scientific agriculture, medicine, selling, advertising, editing a country newspaper, teaching, and forestry. On the other hand, I am sure I would have been unhappy and a failure at bookkeeping, accounting, engineering, operating a hotel or a factory, architecture, all mechanical trades, and hundreds of other activities. Chapter complete.